Hey y'all. So often in machine learning, you would need to perform some sort of data preparation steps on your data to get it ready for the machine learning algorithms. And there are quite a few things that you can do to prepare data, so I have these as a series of videos. And in this video though, I'll start by showing how you can select, shuffle, and filter columns in ML.NET. Alright, so we're here in Visual Studio, have a console project loaded, and as you can see, I have some setup already done here. I have ML.NET NuGet package already installed, and already create my context, and already load in the data. And we're using the housing data set again here, and already have my input schema. Alright, so the first thing I want to show is how you can select columns. And these are the columns that you will want to take from the original data set. And so do select calls, and select columns is going to be a transform. So we'll do context that transforms the select columns, and we give it the column names as strings. Now one thing to note here is look in our original data set, we have different, the headers are kind of spelled differently. They have underscores and all that. But in our input schema, we kind of remove the underscores and do kind of, and we do some different casing here. And when you do the select columns, since we loaded in with this schema class here, we need to give it the column names that are represented in this file instead of the original data. So with the select columns, I'll select the housing median age and the total bedrooms. Now I'll keep that for now. And then since it's a transform, we need to fit and transform that with our data. So we do select calls that fit on our data, and we just call transform from there on that same data. Now, let's see, real quick, I'll just paste in this kind of a helper method so we can see our data pretty easy. And what it does is it takes in the data view from ML.NET, and it calls the preview function on it, and we tell it only to just give it the first 5 rows. And in the preview function, I get all the rows, and then I just print out the keys and the values from the rows. So it's going to be the column name and the value of the column. All right, so with this transform now, we can call display columns on that transform. And I'll do a console reline so we don't need to do any breakpoints or anything. So let's run this and see what it looks like. Alright, so we just get the housing median age and the total bedrooms, the 2 columns that we told it to select from. Alright, I'll comment that out. And next, I'll do drop columns. So instead of selecting the columns that you want to use in your algorithms, the drop columns will just drop the columns that you don't need. And similar to the select columns, this is going to be a transform. So we do transforms dot drop columns, and again we just give it strings of the columns that we want to drop. And so I'll drop the latitude and the longitude columns, and then I'll call fit and transform on them, and I'm continuing to use the original data set with this as well, so we'll get the full data set with it, and then I'll display those. So we go back here to our original data set. The latitude, longitude are the first 2 items in our data set. So we'll run that. You see it starts at housing median age, and we don't see the latitude and longitude anywhere in our data set. So the next thing we can do is that we can actually shuffle our rows. So if you want to get kind of a random shuffle for kind of sampling on our data or something like that, we can call this shuffle rows method. And what that is not a transform, so it'll be on the context that data, the shuffle rows, and we just give it our data, and we have the option to give it a seed parameter too, which giving it a seed tells it to shuffle the same way every time, so you get a bit more reproducible outcomes that way. So I give it a seed, and that's all we have to do for the shuffle rows, and so we can call the display columns on it. And in fact, I'm going to call it the first time with the original data so we can show that it actually shuffled the data. I'm going to do another console.writeLine to differentiate between those two display column calls. I'm going to do asterisks. There we go. So here's our first set before our shuffle. And we can see like the total rooms here are different than the total rooms here, so we can tell that our data has been shuffled. Let's see. Another thing we can do is we can actually take the number of rows that we want, and just like the shuffle rows that's on the data property in the context, and take rows, and we just tell it the number of rows that we want to take. I'll say 2. And in that way, since our display columns method does the top 5, we should only get 2 rows when we call this. There we go. We got the first 2 rows from our data set. And the last thing we can do is we can filter on our rows. And this is also going to be on the data property of the context. And we can filter rows by column, but just want you to make note that there is a filter rows by missing values. We don't have any missing values in this data set, but that's something to make note of that is there if you need it. And so I want to filter on the population column, and I'm going to tell the lower bound to be 0 and the upper bound to be 1,000. And you can probably tell this only works with numerical data. And we can display those. Good. Population here, we got nothing over 1,000. We actually look at our original data set. Here we can see our population. The first couple of rows actually has over 1,000, so it filtered out those rows. Alright, so that's kind of all I wanted to show on some data prep in terms of taking and filtering rows that you would need to kind of get started on data preparation within ML.NET. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you want to see more, feel free to subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.